All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jen Hinderleiter, and I'm the Executive Director at Elevations Foundation. And just want to thank you so much for joining us today in the second of our series of nonprofit trainings that we're offering for free to the community this year. The Foundation's mission is to bring people and resources together to strengthen communities. And we're so excited to be able to help strengthen our amazing nonprofit community in this way. If you have any questions that come up during the webinar, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll monitor that and make sure that all your questions are answered during the presentation. And I am so excited to have Ebony Nash as our presenter here today. Ebony is a practitioner of liberation, racial justice advocate, and community builder that centers her work in radical self-care and healing pedagogy. She identifies herself as a Black and Indigenous woman, a descendant of the Muskogee Creek tribe, and fully steps into her identity through her work of deconstructing oppressive infrastructures and uplifting lived experiences. She received her BA from Hastings College, triple majoring, overachiever, in criminology, psychology, and religion. She then went on to receive her master's in theological studies at Harvard, where she focused on social justice, Black liberation, and institutional frameworks. Ebony prioritizes story weaving and relational understanding as the means for trauma-informed healing. In doing so, Ebony has taken a non-traditional route into development, centering stories as the focal point for philanthropic initiatives. Ebony has been in the development sector for over 6 years, and she has most recently launched her own company called I, Me, We Consulting. I serve on another board with Ebony and know that she's just a general amazing person. So I'm so glad to have you here today and welcome.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here and to be able to talk about story weaving or storytelling. Definitely something that I'm very passionate for and I find to be the core of a lot of work that I do. Without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to jump in. Today, we're going to go over storytelling for success in a holistic framework. So we're not only going to touch on storytelling verbally, but we're going to talk about written and how we can incorporate it into our organization's strategic plan. I always say my company, I, Me, We Consulting, we always talk about how relational engagement invokes lasting transformation, and it's found in the center point of storytelling. So I'm not entirely sure how the webinar feature works, if we're able to use the chat box or not, but just because I really enjoy to know who's in the room or just to get a little bit more about who I am. For my introductions, just in spaces, I always like to do name, area of study, or like what your passion or what your expertise or work is. And then also who you bring in the room with you is another question I like to ask individuals. And if the chat feature works, feel free to share in the chat. Especially who you are and who you bring in the room with you. If not, that's okay. I'd still like to get to know who you are later if we come across each other in community. But just for the sake of who I am and how Jen introduced me, my bio is very wordy. It has a lot of things going on in there, but overall, I'm just an individual who enjoys creating and cultivating community. So the people that I bring in the room with me are the people who have not only raised me, but have influenced my journey throughout my life. And so I think it's important when we talk about who we are, we also talk about what brought us to this space and what we're bringing to this space. So for me, when I come in the room, who I bring in the room with me is my mom. My mom raised me as a single mom in a rural community in Southern Colorado. I bring in my grandparents who assisted her the best that they could, my father who experienced incarceration. I also bring in my sister and her 3 kids who currently live with me. They're just bundles of joy. Those are the people I bring in the room with me because they make the most impact and they're the reason why I do what I do. I also recognize my opportunity and my platform with being in spaces like this. And I recognize that I'm not only here for myself, but I'm also here to bring the knowledge and the information I receive back to my community where they brought me from. I do see the chat feature working, so this is really exciting, or at least the Q&A feature working. Really excited to see that, but we're going to keep going a little bit more about who I am. So I do love quite a few things. I would say, as Jen mentioned, we're on a board together. She knows I engage in as many things as possible, but I have narrowed down my focus this year. So I'm very excited to share that with you. Currently, my full-time role is I work for a nonprofit called Breakthrough Alliance of Colorado. where I teach inside Colorado's maximum security prisons up in Canyon City. These are just a few photos from my guys who are inside, but I have 145 students that I am able to teach a 32-week course with that not only engages in soft skills and career readiness, but we also teach them the entrepreneurial mindset. So how to build a business and how to do it effectively. You can absolutely understand that I bring in story weaving wherever I go. And so this space is where I also bring in my own experience as a child of an incarcerated parent and the impact that I would like to see upon my students' lives. The next thing is my IME consulting business. So that's kind of how I'm showing up here today as the principal consultant. There's also a picture of my board. I could not join without showing a little love to the boards that I sit on. Just this space alone shows that there is power in storytelling and power in creating and cultivating communities that are diverse and inclusive in various ways. Today's agenda, I really want to hit 3 high-level topics for storytelling. So the first one is written narratives and funding. This can be written narratives and funding, but also just written narratives overall. We're going to talk a little bit more about the IME framework that is center point for my business, as well as creating your brand document. So how can that look as an individual, as a startup nonprofit, or even as a very established company / nonprofit? Your brand document is very important for storytelling and story weaving. The next thing I'd like to cover today is verbal sharing in community. So how do we verbally share our stories, or how do we share on the behalf of others and different communities that we may represent in our line of work? This is very rooted in ethical storytelling. So we're going to talk about the difference of ethical storytelling and why it's best to be on the side of ethics and non-ethics. And then we're going to talk about your 2793, which is a very common way to describe a short elevator pitch, specifically for legislation and politics, if anyone is engaging in sharing their story for the betterment of our politics side. Then the next thing we're going to talk about strategic and operational planning. So how does storytelling and story weaving fit in the forward progression and forward movement of your organization, especially when it comes down to your 5-year plan or your operational layout? We're going to talk about that and wrap up today's content. So the first thing we're going to start with is written narratives and funding. But before we can even talk about written narratives, I really want to cover what storytelling is. Storytelling is the action of engaging with ethic-driven verbal or written narrative sharing. That's a very short way of just saying that you are verbally or writing a story of your own or someone else's. I then added, while centering the voices of people impacted by and fighting against injustice for an overall objective of collective understanding. So that little addition, I think, is where the inclusivity comes from in storytelling. Storytelling can be a very harmful act if you don't do it correctly. It's also something that's utilized, especially in our day-to-day community, of how do we break down systems and remove barriers for individuals who are often oppressed or experience disparities in existing structures. So storytelling is the #1 thing that builds a bridge and builds community amongst individuals who have the power to create systems or create opportunities for individuals like us. Additionally, ethical storytelling includes examining power dynamics within a space or a system while understanding one's positionality and openly reflecting their own experience and needs. So as we kind of talk through today, I'll talk about how I share my story to Senate, to House, as well as just here in my local community. And through that, I always recognize the power dynamics at hand and the benefit or the privilege I hold in sharing my story or sharing someone else's story in a community. It's also really important to understand my own positionality to prevent implicit bias or to prevent kind of blindsiding yourself on the other side of the narrative. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. I really love to start with just going over the IME framework. IME framework is something that I've worked on since about 2016. It's something that it started off as a school model. I thought that I was going to create this relational school model that would help historically excluded students find belonging in the classroom. So the question at hand was, why are our students not going to school, or why are they dropping out? Why do they experience unprecedented hardships in their classroom? And then the model moved more into this restorative justice framework, where how can we include and develop a system that individuals can have conversations and build community post-crime or post-harm to ensure that it doesn't happen again in the future and that we are both moving forward as advocates for change. And then it moved into a fix-it model for businesses, company culture, learning about relational development and how do we do philanthropic endeavors, but in a relational and inclusive way. So overall, I backed my framework out and I realized that the I, me, we framework or model is something that we can apply to practically anything in our life. The I stands for identity. So identity is really, it's complex, but it's very individualized. It's focusing in on who are you as the individual, as the storyteller, as the employee, as the employer, maybe just the neighbor down the street, but who are you in your own individual experience? Who are you in your own individual narrative? And what uniqueness do you hold in that narrative? And once you're able to get a better understanding of who you are, you can step into the next stage. But for me, the I, me, we model is sequential. There's no skipping steps. We can't just skip to the me or the we. You have to really center focus yourself on the I to get to understand the identity as an individual. If you're taking notes on how you might best do this, I always recommend doing the Johari window. The Johari window is a really great framework to start with to get to know yourself, get to know your known areas, your blind areas, maybe your partially unsure areas. But the Johari window is an incredible activity or framework to start with if you yourself are trying to get a better understanding of who you are. Additionally, if you're applying the I, me, we framework to a business or an organization, the I will serve mainly as who are you as a business, as a nonprofit? Who are you and what do you bring to the table? It's also understanding who you serve and who also works for you. Those are three different ways that you can focus in on the I to get a better understanding of the identity. Once you get an understanding of your identity, we're going to move into the me, which is meaning. Meaning making is what it means for. And so this is the opportunity where you as an individual or as a company, you're building a relationship with somebody else. You're inviting them into your story authentically in a holistic form. You're not sacrificing a part of your story to make room or comfortability for someone else. You're not changing a part of your narrative so it fits somebody else. Instead, you are taking your story as its whole self and you're sharing it with somebody else in the hopes of understanding. At the same time, you're listening to somebody else's story and you're expecting the same. You're listening in to see how they are unique in themselves and how it might interact with your story, but not how it might change, influence, or improve, move your story. So meaning making has a lot to do with how do you interact with someone without sacrificing those core parts of who you are as an individual, as well as a company. Once you're able to do meaning making in a full sense, you can then step into the we, which is weave, weaving them together in their individual, holistic, and well-meaning way to make this intentional, collective, and communal understanding of one narrative. This is where a lot of people get stuck. How do you weave your narrative in with your 7 different friends? How do you build an organization that is unique in itself, but also is applicable for the funding pathways? Or how do you build a friendship with people who have completely different narratives, completely different ideologies, and maybe they don't hold the same values as you, but how do you hold space for them the same way that they hold space for you, or that you would hope they hold space for you, right? And so that's what this framework does. It is a sequential model, but if you ever find yourself tripping up on the meaning or the weave, you just go back to the next step to get a better understanding of who you are as an individual. And in the center point is where you'll find that communal growth and holistic impact. We'll talk about this framework a little bit more as we go throughout, but now I want to kind of step into creating your brand document. So once you kind of walk through the I, me, we model, and maybe you're using that model on the side while you go through your brand document, it's very important to create one document, written format, somewhere, typed up in your drive, wherever you hold it. It's important to get this on paper. And I find this to be important not only for philanthropic endeavors, but also just as a grounding and centering point for your organization or you as an individual. When you create your brand document, you're going to need key stakeholders in the room: executive leadership, human resources, finances. You're going to need your marketing team there. And if that's all 2 people, perfect. You have the whole team there. But it's important to include these few things. So the first one is intentional language. Intentional language is really centering what your organization uses on a day-to-day basis and why it's impactful to the brand and the people that you serve. So for example, in my line of work, I work inside the prison system. My partners, Department of Corrections, they utilize language that I do not utilize. And that's okay. I understand what they say, but I do not hold it as true or sacred for what I say. So to give you an example of what that might look like is I don't say prisoners. I don't say offenders. I don't say felons, criminals. I say people who are experiencing incarceration. I say residents of Centennial Correctional Facility. I say my incarcerated community. I'm intentional with saying that because I believe that there's harm in language and the language you choose to use, especially as an organization. So identifying your intentional language. Do you use substance abuse or do you use substance misuse? So just those slight changes are really influential for who you are, and they'll help set you aside from other individuals or organizations who are also doing this line of work as well. The next thing you need to do is identify your customer segment. It's really important to identify your customer segments, but understand that there's 3 different segments that you need to identify when you're going through the customer segments. So the first one is, who do you serve? The people you might serve. This could be your community that you offer services to, but identifying who it is that you are delivering a service to, your service community. Who are they? And then who helps you in serving this community? So this is your staff, your board, your executive leadership. Who are they? And the third one is, who is your community of support? This can be your funders, your external partners, people who share your giving campaigns online, the community that's there to speak into you. Who are they? So once you write those 3 segments down, who you serve, who helps you in serving them, your staff, your employees, your board, executive leadership, and then who's your community of support. Then you go through the questions of who are they truly? So you ask yourself, what do they physically look like? You know, that could be ethnicity, that could be race. Are they women? Are they male? Are they, young? What's their age? You know, you ask the questions of who are they physically? Where do they locate themselves? So what area do they center themselves in? This is specifically important for your staff because you might notice that there might be transportation barriers for your staff to get to you. And then you ask, where are they from? What are some of their unique experiences? What do they bring to the table? And what are some barriers that they may experience in their own individual narratives? Understanding those narratives, you might also look into the news. Once you'll get an understanding of the diversity of your organization, you might realize that there are some things happening around the world that could emotionally and physically and mentally impact the people you serve, the people who work for you, or your support community in broader sense. So getting an understanding of your customer segments is very important, helps you decide where you're going to move. Then, of course, you include your mission and value statement. Everyone should have that. And if not, reach out. I'm sure someone has resources to help you develop that. Your organizational narrative is next. Your organizational narrative, I always tell people you should write 3 iterations of your organizational narrative. The first one should be really short, 250 words. The next one, a little longer, 500 words. And the third one should be around 1,000 words. And each narrative should say the same thing, but just give a little extra. And the reason we do this is because in grant writing or in philanthropic development, you're going to be asked to tell your story in a really short way. We're going to ask to tell it in an extended way. Either way, you're prepared. The team collectively have input their ideas in this narrative, and it's an easy grab and go placement for when you are applying for things on a quick moving basis. The next thing you're going to do is the program narrative, and I would do the exact same thing. For every program, depending if you have 1 program or 10, for every program, write your 250 word, 500 word, and 1,000 word narrative explaining what this program is and what it does. Same exact reason. It's a really quick grab and go method when you're applying for funding, or if you're just sending out a quick social media post, a thank you, an info card. It's really great to grab the same narrative over and over again to ensure that you all are grounded in it as a company or a nonprofit organization. Then you identify your problem and your solution. The problem should be data driven. So talk about what is the problem facing your service community, add data in. If you can keep the data between 5 years within relevance, that's best. I never like to quote data within over 2 years, but if given the opportunity to do a longevity to report, you can include around 5 years is acceptable. And then create your solution. What does your nonprofit, your business do that provides a solution to this problem? Why is it different? In this solution, it's really important to mention why or how your success has came through. So maybe quote off some good success measurements that you've had, talk about ways that you've changed your program to better fit and serve your problem at hand. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. All right. And the next one here is just data-informed value propositions. So a value proposition is just a statement that sets you aside from other organizations or companies that might be doing the same thing as you. Data-informed is utilizing data that has highlighted either your problem or your success and put that in the same statement of why you are of value to someone to invest in, to partner with, or to build community with. So overall, what makes you different? And this can be per program, this can be per location. Your value proposition is very individualistic to your offerings itself. And then just the next two things, which we'll cover again later, are your theory of change and your logic model. These are two development collaterals that are really important for explaining your change, your program offerings, and how it impacts your community abroad. It's a very short graphic that is often requested in grants. It's often requested in pitch decks. It's just a really great brief way for a funder or community partner to absorb your information in a very tangible way. So we'll talk about those here in just a little bit. We're gonna move into verbal sharing in community. This is one of my most favorite moments, just because I'm a storyteller at heart. Not only do I do written narratives, but I also share my own story in the community in multiple capacities. One story I'm going to share with you today actually is not including my profession, but something I do on a personal stance. So in 2020, I registered to be a living donor on the National Marrow Donor Program in MVP. It's a quick cheek swab if anyone's interested in registering, but I registered to be a donor during the pandemic. I needed a bigger community. I needed a sense of purpose. I had no idea what was laid out for me ahead. Just a year later, which is extremely rare, I was matched. I was matched to a 12-year-old girl who was battling cancer. And in that match, I was able to donate bone marrow on September 9th of 2021. I was the only match in 41 million people. I find that to be very profound and very unique. So down below, you'll see this beautiful picture. This is Amaya, and Amaya is my bone marrow recipient. She was suffering from acute leukemia when she was 12 years old, and she had no related match, not even in her family. She has 3 sisters, one being a twin, and none of them were her match. And so she needed a match to be able to overcome this battle she had. And I happened to be that match. So 2 different stories that then collided into one story. And I'm going to share with you this beautiful video, actually. We had the chance to meet last November. And so give me 1 second as I buffer to share my other screen here for you. I'm going to share this quick video with you and tell you the importance of this in relation. Oh, 1 second. I got to share my audio as well. Here we go. In relation to verbal storytelling and the importance of it. So let me know if you can't hear this.
Ebony is this ball of energy. She's compassionate, very selfless. Anything to help somebody. I mean, I've seen her give up her last dollar because a friend needed it.
I like to help people. I like to work in the community. Family is very important to me. I joined Be the Match during COVID. I needed to find purpose. I needed to find passion. I needed to find something that I can put my energy to. When I got the phone call, I thought it was a scam. A year later, I'm a match. No way. I actually think I called my mom immediately, and she's like, "What are you gonna do?" I was like, "I'm gonna do it. Obviously, we're gonna do it." I was really excited to know I was a match.
It was just like Ebony to give a piece of herself to somebody that needed it. A mother couldn't be any more proud.
Amaya, she is beautiful, fun to be around. Get ready for honesty, because she's honest.
One day, I was on the couch with my sister and I woke up with a bloody nose that just wouldn't stop. I was very tired and I was weak.
COVID was happening, so only one person could go to the hospital with her. They ran labs. Then the doctor came in and we sat down and she said, we think she has leukemia.
I was scared, I was nervous, nauseous, and the first thing that came to my mind was, am I gonna die?
I was trying to hold it together as much as I could because for her, I didn't want her to be scared. We had this little 12-year-old daughter who didn't even get to go back to 6th grade. And obviously I'm scared. That was the start of many sleepless nights and up and down.
I knew COVID was going around, but I was hoping they would at least make exceptions for my family to come. It was a hard day and I needed my sisters there with me. And when I couldn't see them, it was heartbreaking.
It was right away, blood transfusions, platelet transfusions, everything was down. Liver and pancreas had suffered from a chemo med. She didn't go to the bathroom for 3 weeks. And then she ended up diabetic and, she was so jaundiced and she pretty much couldn't walk. But there was just something new every day that I couldn't keep up. One of the hardest things was when I had to shave her hair in the hospital that night because the doctor said she's gonna lose it in a couple weeks and she just started crying. She's 12 years old. I know when I was 12, I loved hair, makeup, that was her.
It kept getting longer and stretching out into more longer days, to weeks, to months.
And it was actually 1 year and 1 day to the T of her diagnosis that she relapsed. Her best chance would be a bone marrow transplant. The transplant coordinator, she called me within a week and started talking about Be the Match.
When they tested my sisters and my mom, I wanted at least my twin sister to be a match. Knowing that she wasn't even a match, even though she is my twin sister, it was heartbreaking.
But they came back and said, we've got 2 10-for-10 matches for Maya. Again, this is all new to me, but I'm like, okay, yes, that's the one we want.
Not just matches, but perfect matches. I was so happy and thankful.
I just think that there's a purpose that I got a call. There's a purpose I signed up, and now I'm a match out of millions of people on the registry. It really wasn't that inconvenient. Be the Match took care of everything. The entire process, I felt honestly like a superstar. And I made a compilation of all my videos and I just showed people holistically what was the process and to follow along. I woke up to just so many people calling me, texting me. My phone was blowing up and the video went viral. We got almost 2,000 people registered and one person went on to donate.
For Maya, she's doing great. She's thriving. She was starting high school that freshman year. She fought the good fight. And I've always been so proud of her.
So it's been a year since I donated bone marrow. She wants to connect with me. I got the email today. I'm so happy. I'm so excited to meet her.
Oh, we had thought about the donor the whole time. From the get-go, we were like, when will we be able to find out about the donor? That was even before the transplant.
I was too scared to call, so I first started off with a text.
It says, "Hi, my name is Amaya. You saved my life." Oh God, I'm gonna cry. I'm so very thankful for you. I wouldn't have the little moments with my family and friends if it weren't for you. I waited 2 years for this to be over, and now it finally is because of you. I know I was the one fighting, but you're the reason I'm done fighting, so thank you so much. I get to live to see my kids, and I get married and graduate because of you. You did an amazing thing for a stranger you didn't even know, and that's awesome. God, I want to cry. I just love her. From there, it's just like my life transformed. I needed that in the moment. I also joined the ambassador team, which was super fun. I would say almost a bucket list item. So I was able to fly out in May and advocate for a House bill to help donors save lives like me. And I just most recently became a co-advisor of the Midwest region for our ambassadors.
Without Be the Match and Ebony, have a chance that I wouldn't have my daughter. I want to say thank you, but I don't. I almost feel stupid saying thank you because that's not enough. But thank you, because she's here, and all because you could go give something so little of yourself, take a little bit of time out.
I'm just so very excited to meet her and run up on the stage to give her a big hug and never let her go.
I can just imagine seeing her and wondering how quickly I can get to her without falling and without knocking her over, for sure.
I am so excited to meet Ebony. I just can't wait to hug her.
She's my community. She's also my sister now.
I see the chat popping up with people grabbing tissues, and I just love it. It is a very emotional video, but it's just because of, you know, the rarity, you know, of finding a match and then saving a life. It's something that all of us, I think, hope to do someday. Very grateful I was able to do it. The purpose I share this is because of the very second part of the video. It talks about how I've continued to share the story. So since that video was created, we have now have 4,000 people on the registry because of my storytelling efforts. And we've had 4 people go on to donate and save a life. And so the power of storytelling, even in this small form of making a TikTok video, which friends, I'm young, but I'm not the best at TikTok. They've caught the attention of millions of people. Good Morning America did a segment about it. Just the way that we're able to build community through this empathetic sharing of one's experience, one's opportunity to save a life. It has moved bridges and it's moved mountains for people. Here, pictured here, you'll see a lot of, these shirts are very loud, I know, but you see us at our state, our nation's capital, meeting with legislative officials, talking about what is the benefit of donating bone marrow and how can they support us in these efforts. So twice now, I've been able to fly into Washington, D.C., share my story with over 50 legislative officials, and talk about why I need their support and why NMDP needs their support to continue doing this life-saving work. So there's 3 current House and Senate bills, 3 House, 1 Senate bill that are up to support the efforts of bone marrow collection. It is an easy process. Personally, only 10% of the time people donate bone marrow. The other percent of the time it's through PDSC, which is just through your blood. The rest of the time though, or the most of the time, people who are called, over 50% of people called actually deny the opportunity to donate bone marrow or donate PDSC. So that means 50% of individuals who could save a life say no. And so legislative efforts will support and alleviate the barriers and access to donating. And that's why storytelling and story sharing of this specific moment has been impactful. So very excited about that. I can share more later about the House bills. If you'd like, you can also follow me on social media and learn a little bit more. But this storytelling effort alone has created opportunity as well as laid the ground for a little 12-year-old girl to now start high school, which is amazing. So thank you for indulging me in that. So we're going to step into verbal sharing and the importance of verbal storytelling. But before we even talk about that, there are some specific things we need to understand when collecting stories. So when I was going to tell my story, of course, there's that individual aspect that I was the expert of my own experience. However, I had to understand the experience of others for me to effectively tell my story in front of legislative officials. I had to understand the fear. I had to understand the vulnerability, the potential for exploitation, everything in between. I had to understand what is the risk of actually sharing my own story in the face of someone who has lobbying and voting power. Just to give an example, when I would share my story, I would tell the story about how I saved this 12-year-old girl's life. And unfortunately, it sounds like a cold response, but most legislative officials would say, okay, but what do small business owners think about this? What implications does this have for employers? How much is this going to cost someone? So the response and questions of my story seem to be very harmful or cold, but they are very intuitive because they themselves are story weavers. They need to understand the collective narrative of what's happening. So on an individual level, storytelling can feel very invasive. It can feel tokenizing. You could engage in re-traumatizing or extractive behavior. But on a community level, storytelling can perpetuate harmful stereotypes about a group of people. It can give more information or more relation to an opposition of narratives. And it can also reduce people to feel a little more than their pain and trauma. It can really put people back into a space that they do not particularly want to be in. So understanding if you're telling a story on an individual level, it might be specific. And if it's on a collective level, you might be telling a broader story that is out of reach within your own experience. So before we even dive into that, I do have 3 bullet points here to consider when telling a verbal story or just other people's stories in general. And the first one is make sure to build relationships and ensure it is in collaboration and mutual respect. So whenever you're telling a story, it would be really, really harmful of me to tell a story of a community that I actually have no connection to. If I told the story of Minnesota's farming community, I have no connection to Minnesota, nor do I have a connection to their farming community. So it would be wrong for me to go into a space and share a narrative that I am misinformed and not connected to. So before sharing your own story or somebody else's story, make sure that you have that relationship, that you're able to build a connection, and it's in a mutual respect for their own narrative and for their own experience. The next one is verify the facts, understand the tone, and confirm consent. Verify the facts. So if someone tells you it was about 4%, verify what was it, 4%? Or maybe like 3.5%, verify the facts to ensure that you are not communicating information that might not be true itself. That will lead to credibility issues, that will lead to potential legality issues, depending on how you're sharing the story. But make sure you understand the facts, confirm them from the person that is giving you the narrative, and cite them in your sharing of your story. The next is understand the tone. So if this, we'll talk about tone here in a little bit more, but if this is a story that might be harmful, understand that the tone in which you tell the story is also impactful for the way that somebody embodies or experiences the story. So if you're telling a very sad story, which oftentimes sharing the story of donating bone marrow could be sad, it's important to level that tone and express it either in a direct way through your narrative sharing, or express that through the collection of these stories, I have experienced the tone of sadness or mournfulness around this narrative. By just saying that, you don't have to change the way that you present yourself, but explain to the person that you're telling the story the way that the community feels about the story being shared. Maybe they're timid, maybe they're fearful of exploitation. Explain that. And then confirm consent. Whenever you tell a story, especially somebody else's story, make sure that there's consent given multiple times throughout the day. If you're interviewing them, make sure in the beginning there's consent. Maybe midway through, you say, hey, I just want to make sure, are you still okay with sharing these parts of your story? At the end, when you repeat back to them the story, make sure that they confirm consent of everything that you have mentioned. If they say, hey, I don't want this included, but I think you should know, sometimes they say, hey, off the record or behind the scene, that information has been clearly disclosed as not comfortable to be shared, but it helps in the tone and understanding as the storyteller to have that additional information. So make sure there's consent around every detail being shared in your point of storytelling. And then the next is embrace complexities and be authentic in context. Everyone, every person, we are all unique, we're all individual, and there's way more to us than the individual story that you're telling. When I walk into a legislator's office, they know that I'm here to talk about bone marrow, but they know that I'm also a young professional in Colorado who works in the prison system, and there's so much more to me than just the bone marrow story. So understand when you're telling your own story or you're telling someone else's, it's bigger than what might be presented, and it's bigger than what time allows. So embrace complexities and understand that there might be facts that you just can't include, but they're just as mutually as important as the other. All right, and the 2 frameworks I want to cover before I go to my next slide, there's 2 different primary frameworks in storytelling that we are keen to know. And the first one is asset framing, and the next one is deficit framing. So these are two separate ways you can frame a story. And this has a lot to do with the tone in which you do it. So asset framing is sharing a story in benefit or in inclusion of someone's hard work and efforts. So this is if I'm telling a story on how a nonprofit is really changing the game of housing in Kansas. This nonprofit has a streamlined system. It's an asset, and I'm advocating, I'm telling the story because I believe that it should be adopted in other states or in other communities. Now, if I say deficit framing, you're telling the story of a community that is on the other end, the one experiencing an oppressive behavior, the one who experiences disparities, and the community that is seeking support and change to benefit them. So that's deficit framing. Whenever you tell the deficit framing, that is where more exploitation could sneak in, but telling their stories to inform somebody that this is happening. So for example of this, I did some advocacy earlier in my life about rural Colorado. Rural Colorado had a huge shortage in daycare that the state legislative leaders had no idea about it because it's really hard to get people with actual credentials to live in rural Colorado. It's really hard to find accessible daycare when there's miles and miles apart from housing units. So much can go into why daycare itself, or CCAP, which is the government assistance with daycare, can provide barriers for people in rural Colorado. So sharing that deficit framework helps people know where there's areas of improvement in legislation or just in organizations in general. And then the next thing we're going to go over is the 2793. So once you have cultivated and created your narrative, it's time to verbally share it. If you are sharing this to legislation, to political officials, or if you're even just sharing this to leadership or individuals who just might have short amount of time available, a 2793 is your quick version of an elevator pitch. However, elevator pitches are typically 30 seconds. 2793s have a leverage, a beneficial leverage, because you're going to get it done in 9 seconds. And in 9 seconds, you have left room to exchange business cards, to follow each other on LinkedIn, to allow for additional questions, and to show that you can concisely communicate what you would like to achieve in just 9 seconds. So 2793, it's 27 words, typically. You can buffer a little, 9 seconds, and 3 topics. We try and stay on 3 topics just to ensure it's just concise enough for us to understand the problem, the solution, and the direct action. What are some things you want from this person, and what do you want them to know? Your 3 topics should be things that are a little open-ended, but provoke your audience to ask questions or lean in a little bit more to get to know where you're heading with this conversation. So that's 2793. If you have questions, I'd love to go over it. The next thing I'm going to quickly go over is mission statements. So we've gone through the framework of I Me Lead. We've gone through the ethics of storytelling. We've talked a little bit about how do you tell your story, or how do you create your brand document to be inclusive of stories. We dabbled a little bit of verbal sharing of your story. We're going to take it all the way back to the I, the identity. Who are you as a storyteller? And once you're able to get a better idea to understand who you are as a storyteller, you'll be able to tell your story in a very authentic and non-biased way. So to do that, I always encourage people to do 2 things. The first one is a mission statement. Most organizations, nonprofits, as well as corporate, they have mission statements. It just is a short way to let people know where you focus and what your work is centered on. I personally believe that every professional should have their own mission statement. I believe that this helps you stay focused in your passion and your expertise. It also helps in informing the people around you what could be things they can come to Ebony for, or what are some things that Ebony would be interested in. It also helps in redirecting people who might be mission creeps, or who might be pushing you out of your mission and asking you to be more flexible than you're willing to be. I use my mission statement professionally when I'm joining boards, when I'm looking for new career advancements. I even use my mission statement personally when I'm talking about, maybe it's my significant other, maybe they just don't hold the values necessary for my mission statement, or maybe it's just where I want to live, the community I want to surround myself in. So I'm going to three ways that you can identify your mission statement. And it's to start with asking yourself, what is my mission? My mission is to blank. Super simple. Then to do this, to accomplish this, it is to blank. And then this is important to me because blank. And it doesn't have to be in these words, but so long you hit these topics, you're going to have a perfect mission statement. So just for an example, this is my mission statement. My mission is to abolish and expose oppressive, destructive, and socially violent structures that counteract the progression of humanity, more specifically marginalized communities. To do this, I actively invite lived experience, reject cultural violence, and continually practice the embodiment of liberation and story weaving to be the core of healing and bridge building within communities. This has been my mission statement for about 5 years now. I changed it a lot before then just because I was nitpicking things that were representative of who I am and things that were not. And something that's really important when you go through your mission statement writing is that intentional word summary we talked about in the beginning. What are some things that you want to mention in here that are intentional and inclusive of your mission? And so, for example, my very first sentence is very, very loaded in language that might be triggering for employers to read. And I invite that conversation every day. My mission is to abolish and expose. So those are two words that some people often come up to me and they're like, I don't think you meant to use the word abolish. And I don't think you meant to use the word expose. But I very much intentionally use those words. And so if you go to my LinkedIn, you'll see my bio, my about me is actually my mission statement with an intentional word summary to explain why I use the words that I use. So abolish, I don't believe that you can rehabilitate a system that was never correct from the start. It's really hard to revert back to something that was never doing well in the beginning. So I said abolish because you have to deconstruct to construct something that is equitable and inclusive. I also said expose because I truly believe that some systems, some organizations, some people don't think that they are delivering harm at the capacity and size that they are. I think that it's not apparent to people that they might be hurting others. It's really hard to know when you do. So I say expose because I really want to rip the veil off and let people know what is happening and how is it impacting diverse communities. I wasn't asked for questions, but this is a webinar. So if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We're going to keep it moving. Definitely make your mission statement very helpful. And if you need help with that, my business also does a training on that as well. So now for our last 30 or minutes, we're going to step into the final section of storytelling, and that is strategic and operational planning. This is the part of the presentation that is kind of focused on fundraising. So if you aren't a fundraising professional, I would advise you to just take notes and listen because this is also a really great way to understand how you can include story weaving into any operational planning ahead. But operational planning is very important in understanding narratives and then constructing them to tell them in a way that is forward progressing and moving of your company and the people that you serve. So to start, I really want to go over what my company identifies to be as the funding funnel. This might not be all inclusive of all the funding pathways. Most of us probably know that there's just 5 to 7 different ways you can raise money, whether that's from individual donors, power donors, matching gifts, foundations, planned giving, whatever it is. But this is the most consistent way that my company tracks funding for the benefit of individuals in preparation for securing those programmatic or categorical dollars. So for starters, for the funding funnel to start, there has to be a known problem. The community, an individual, the state, somebody has to raise awareness of a problem. Housing, great example. We know that housing is a problem in every state across the country. Affordable housing, accessible housing, it's a huge issue. For it to be a known problem, there has to be levels of awareness, advocacy, and data. And not only that, but they have to be presented to the right people who have the power and who have the capacity to move that forward and advocate for funding to be delegated to that problem now or in the future. For example, for this, congressional funding just came out, and for the nonprofit I work at, we submitted for congressional funding, elevating and highlighting a problem there is in the workforce. 1/3 of the workforce is incarcerated. So that's 78 million people with criminal backgrounds that need a job. That's funding that we were able to elevate as an identified opportunity for investment, for growth, and for the betterment of our community. So once there's an identified problem, then it moves down to either the House or the Senate, depending which way that you go. And then there's general discussion that takes place. They talk about it. What was this proposal? What's the problem? Who does it impact? Is it very, very small? Like, does it impact just one small community in West Virginia? Or does it impact the entire state? Or is it national? Is it a problem that's experienced in different pockets throughout the world? So that conversation is had, and they're able to leverage or identify the complexities of the problem if given the right information from the source or origin story. Then they go into drafting a budget and pathway. So this drafting a budget, it can be at a state level, a federal level, it could even be at your local county level. But they draft a budget and they say, you know, housing is a huge issue. We want to dedicate 40% of our funds to it to give it a $1.2 million advantage. They have no idea at this moment how to fix the problem. They just know that there's a problem and they need to delegate money towards it. A great example of this is during COVID, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was money that was dedicated, half funds was for housing, not just for people's rental assistance or mortgage assistance, but it was also for people to do the correct repairs to prevent themselves from being evicted. It was for individuals who were almost about to be evicted, but it helped them secure their home long enough so they can have a safe space during the pandemic. That was very important for the government, and I think they allocated around $50 billion to it, or 50 million, I can't remember, don't quote me, but it was quite a bit. Another example is ARPA dollars. ARPA dollars did the very same thing where they were giving them the communities to invest in health-related increases, behavioral therapy, anything to really support the community during this time that has been a precedented moment for a lot of us, majority of us, right? So once they delegate money to a problem, then it goes down to a collective vote. The collective vote, they decide, is this something that all of us can agree upon? I put stars on those boxes to let people know that this is where a level of accountability is held. So during the collective vote, if they vote forward for the housing budget, then there's a level of responsibility being delegated somewhere. So they might delegate $70,000 to the state of California for housing. It's not very much, but we'll roll with it. $70,000 to the state of California for housing. There's a responsibility held there now for the state of California. So the rest of the funnel, starting to go down, so now it's becoming a funnel, right? So the rest of the funnel is where funding is dispersed. So approved funds are then sent to intermediaries or state entities. Intermediaries are individuals that just steward the funding for the most part. So those can be at a federal, state, or local level. They're just individuals who then take the responsibility of the money and they start creating what we know as requests for proposals or RFPs. The state entities will do the same. Once the state's given California $70,000 for housing, the state then decides, okay, do we want to do $35,000 in grant funding for nonprofits and then $35,000 to state departments? They get to decide. We get told later what they decide. You just follow those conversations down the pipeline. Once the intermediaries are identified, another level of accountability is held, and they're in charge of stewarding the funds and designating their KPIs, the key performance indicators. So once those KPIs are made, they're made from the origin conversation. So if there is a housing deficit in California and California gets $70,000 in funding, they're going to go back to that initial conversation and say, okay, well, whether rural or urban, was it specific to tribal nations or is it open broadly? Is it justice impacted or is it individuals who have TANF or young mothers? So they kind of go through and they sweep through what is our target population and they make that RFP with its KPIs. Then the RFP is released. That's when you're able to know what type of funding it is, if it's going to be open operational, if it's going to be categorical, block, project. All of those just kind of tell you your restrictions on spending and your restrictions in utilizing these funds. Many times when an RFP is put out, they actually have a very blind perception of the problem at hand. So they're asking organizations to tell us your story. Why do you think that you deserve this money for your impact? And how can you ensure we reach these KPIs while supporting and elevating your mission? It's like a job application, right? They're asking for someone to be liaisons of this money, do the work that they necessarily need to do while ensuring that the mission is accomplished that has been identified by them and the people above them. It's a roll-up figure, if you really think about it. And so once our RFPs are released, that's when we all step into grant writing. We start talking about our story. We start advocating for why we can be great stewards of this funding, why our story, our customer segments are included in their service population, how our statistics and our past program operations has served as a valuable source towards this narrative. That's where we start writing the grant. And then you identify partners in the grant writing process. So who could help take what you do to the next level? Who could help satisfy a section of the RFP that you just might not be the best at? So once you identify partners, that's when you really start to get going on your stewardship of funding and the way that you are not only weaving your narrative, but weaving others who need the narratives into the story. This is going to take us into what is next called a braided essay. I left it as a braided essay because this is the second I mentioned earlier. There's two things you can do to better prepare yourself as a storyteller. This is the second thing that I would recommend for you as an individual. So I guess the second and the third thing, because in the beginning I mentioned the Johari window. So the Johari window, writing your own mission statement, and then the braided essay. A braided essay, you can definitely Google it. It's a very well-known writing technique. But a braided essay is where you pick between 2 to 5 topics, and it's best if they aren't directly related. They can be related in a small sense, but not directly related. It's a little easier to do. And then write those stories independently. So in their own original format, write those stories. For example, I wrote a braided essay. I wrote a braided essay about my experience as a child of an incarcerated parent. I narrated that experience, specifically in the school system as a child of an incarcerated parent. Then I pulled the statistics of children who are incarcerated parents and their relation to education. I then pulled the letters my dad wrote me while he was in prison. And then I talked about, what did I bring in? Oh, I brought in the history of my favorite board game, which is Candyland. Kind of unrelated, but it's a game I played when I went to see my dad in prison. So I wrote all those stories out individually, wrote their own narrative, their own framework, beautiful. Then you split them up in spaces that it makes sense to drop. So in a space that you've ended your point and you're moving on to the next. It might not be by paragraph, it could be by 2-3 paragraphs, but when the concept or the focus changes, you start splitting them off into different sections. My first advice is to change the color. Change the color of each story so you know that this one's red, this one's pink, this one's blue, whatever it is. So once you section them off into different subsets, you're going to braid them together. You're going to just start copying, pasting different paragraphs into each other until you have one document that has included all your stories, different colors, split into different paragraphs, and braided into one story. You're then going to read the story. You're going to read it without bias and without judgment. And if it doesn't make sense, start moving paragraphs around to where they make more sense. But by the end of this activity, you should have one story that makes sense with 2 to 5 different topics. One of my friends did one about his struggle for sobriety. And he wrote about his struggle for sobriety, a narrative about his relationship with his dad, which was not positive. A couple diary entries that he pulled from himself when he was a lot younger. And then he talked about the history of a crematory, cremation, right? Cremation of the bodies. So he wrote all of that and he brought it into one narrative. And it was one of the most impactful writings I've ever read before. It just brought aspects and metaphors into space that I had no anticipation of engaging with in a similar fashion. So once you do your braided essay, you're able to tell your story in a very unique and metaphorical or poetic way. You're starting to realize the bigger complexities of you as an individual and how you fit in different pockets of life. I will say a braided essay is always fun if you want to do a self-narrative because it's It's something fun to just keep on you, to tell your story. So braided stories, braided narratives are also important for writing your strategic and operational plans. And the reason being is because when you situate yourself in a nonprofit or in a company in general, you are one of thousands in that state. You are one of many doing the same thing that you're doing. And you are one entity that is asking for a lump sum of money that also thousands and thousands of people are asking for at the same time. So when you're creating your funding narrative or you're creating your strategic pathway, it's important to look outside of yourself as a nonprofit and as an organization. It's important to understand, who are you as the nonprofit? What's your vision, your mission? And then also, who are your community partners? Who are people in your area that could support your mission? Who are people that are doing similar work as you? Who are people that you partner with on a daily, your stakeholders, the people that allow you accessibility to get the work that you're doing done? And then the next thing is, you need to understand your local entities. Every nonprofit or company has a local entity that does similar things as them. So for me, I teach inside the prison system. My local entities are the Department of Higher Education. The Department of Higher Education is an entity that administers higher education or oversees higher education for the state. Although my class is not higher education, I look to them for guidance because their competencies and what they've deemed to be important, it's important for me as well, because I'm doing very similar work in a similar area. I also looked for the Department of Corrections. The whole entity that I operate in, I have to have a partnership with them to be able to go inside, administer my classes, and to ensure what I'm doing helps them satisfy their strategic goals as well. And that's exactly what a braided narratives do. So take your strategic goals. Let's take your nonprofit and say that you have 3 goals that you want to achieve this year. Maybe it's to improve recruitment efforts. Maybe it's to serve individuals, provide them equitable housing. And the third one is to develop an educational program that is immersive and relative to the workforce. Now, when we look at our community partners, we're looking to see who can support these 3 goals of ours, who can help streamline recruitment, who can help us with referrals, get the word out, who can help us in building that career readiness and educational program, who has the skill set to be a trainer, a facilitator, who has the knowledge that can then take our programs to the next level. And then the other one is data collection. Who has the ability to collect the data, or who has a framework that works for our organization to collect the information necessary for our strategic plan? So once you identify those partners, they've now been slotted as potential partners for your strategic plan and your operational growth. On the other side, it's the local entities. What state, government, federal entities are doing things or have identified areas where your strategic plan can roll up into? So for my business, my professional pathway, or working in the prisons, I not only look at the Department of Corrections strategic plan, but I also look at the Department of Justice strategic plan. I want to know at the federal level, at the very top, what are their goals for the next 5 years? Like, what do they want to see different? What are some things they want to invoke change for? I then identify those goals, and I go back down to the state level. And the state goals are always taken from the federal goals. So that's easy things to understand, is that the state strategic plan for the Department of Corrections is relative or in relation to the Department of Justice strategic plan. So they should be very similar. Then I take the state goals and I lay them out next to our goals. And I see, where does Breakthrough's program goal fit the state strategic plan for the Department of Correction, as well as the Department of Justice strategic plan. So once I get a better understanding of how my organization's goals roll up into the bigger picture for the overall Department of Justice and justice impacted individuals in our country, I'm then better able to advocate why our organization deserves money, because not only are we moving forward our mission as an organization, but we are supporting and alleviating capacity of the Department of Corrections for Colorado, as well as the Department of Justice for the federal government. Once you're able to make that pathway, individuals who understand the funding funnel, they can look and see, this is a great investment of our money, because it is serving multiple parts of our plan as a whole. So the benefits of braiding your organization narrative with community partners and local entities is that it streamlines funding in a direct pathway. You're able to maximize the benefit, maximize the outcome, because an individual or a funding entity sees you as somebody who's going to ripple change throughout multiple parts, not just for your small community. It also ensures mission alignment in work without the pressure to do it all. The organization I work for, we are an in-facility educational organization. We're not the best for reentry services because we're kind of new. So we find partners to help make that possible. So we don't have to build it ourselves. We don't have to delegate that infrastructure ourselves. Instead, we found partners to do that. And we go in on funding opportunities with these partners to let the government know, to let the state, or just to let funders know that we are mission aligned, that we are experts in our work. We see the benefit of collaboration, and we are ready to take your dollars and expand them across the community to serve the broader population at the best that we can. And when funders see this, they see that there's intentionality, there's efficacy, there's effort. It's all streamlined into supporting the individual where the problem originated at. And the next one is it improves sustainability and future projections. So by braiding in your narrative with your local entities, your state, your federal strategic plans, by braiding in your goals and your intentions in with them, you're also providing yourself a safekeeping that you are sustainable, that you are relative, and that you have a great projection for funding coming down in the future. When the strategic plans are placed at a state and federal level, you can be sure that there will be funding coming for those strategic priorities. If the strategic priority is to increase retention of employees at a state level, there will be funding coming down for that. If there is a priority to increase Head Start programs for children in a rural Colorado, there will be funding for that because it's in a state and a federal strategic plan. So you as an organization can be sure if you connect your strategic goals with theirs by braiding your narratives, that you will have sustainable funding moving forward in the, as you go. I hope this makes sense. I know that it's not like a talking back webinar, but if it doesn't make sense, you are more than welcome to reach out to me and I can talk to you more about how you as an organization or you as an individual can braid in your narrative with local entities, state, federal, even just community partners, and how it is a benefit to you moving forward and creating that sustainable plan. This is one of my next and almost final slides is forward strategic planning. So once you're able to identify yourself as an organization, yourself as a storyteller, you're able to identify your customer segments. Once you're able to really streamline your narrative and braid it in with your state, local, and federal entities, you're then able to take a step into actually setting your plan. And so here are some tips I'm going to give you in setting your plan up in a storytelling mindset that is not only inclusive, but reflective to the community you'd like to serve. So the first one is establish your center story and then supplement it with fiscal highlights and stats. When I say establish your center story, I'm talking about establishing that one narrative that your organization was either founded upon or that your organization tells the most, and that one narrative that doesn't change, right? So if you are a housing organization, you can say, it's a great brand assumption that housing is a holistic need, not just for rural and urban communities, but also marginalized communities and in the greater metro areas. Whatever you want to say, you have a center story that housing is an issue. You have a center story that food insecurity is an issue. Whatever your center story is, know it, get it down T, and work with it. For myself, for my organization, our center story is that individuals who are experiencing incarceration, 95% of them are going to get released at some point in time. And there are barriers to accessing equitable employment, as well as barriers to educating them to be qualified candidates. And so there, our program steps in to provide that service. That's our center story, never change. Now, supplement them with fiscal highlights. So that means in the past year, what were some of your highlights? What were some of your service statistics? What was the demographic layout? Did you serve mainly parents? Did you serve veterans? Did you serve children with diverse abilities? What was the fiscal highlights and stats? Add those into your center story. So once you're able to identify your story, establish your story, you're then going to identify your service community, internal and external. This goes back to when we talked about your customer segments. Who is it that you serve? Who are the people that provide that service? Do you have lived experience in your organization? Do you have lived experience on your board? Who is it that's making decisions? And should they be the one making decisions? Are they the right person? Then locate your development segments and investment pathways. Your development segments are the areas in which that you can seek money or you can seek progressive movement in your organization. And investment pathways are how you can continue to build sustainable funding. So we talked about the ways that you can find funders, donors. So for me, I always say there's 5 ways. The individual donor, which is somebody who has a giving capacity of anything, $10, $5, $40. Most of us know that the number of donors you have is almost just as impactful as the dollar of donors produced. So who are your individual donors? And then your power donors, the people who have the ability to give you over $2,000 at a time, over $2,000 in gifts and contributions. Those are what you would call power donors. And then you have your matching gifts. Matching gifts are really located in employers that their staff donate. They also want to donate as well. They'll match the gift. It's best if you can find an employer who matches 1-for-1. And then there's also the planned giving, which is individuals who you've cultivated a relationship with, and they plan to give you lump sums later in life, or they've created an endowment, a legacy. Maybe you're in their will and their trust. But those are planned givers, people that you can plan on continuously moving forward. And another one is foundations. Foundations is the other way they can make money. So identify your development segments and investment pathways, but make sure that when you're doing this, that your story is relative to their own. Make sure that you understand their story and that your story is either reflective, beneficial, supportive, or in some way related to theirs. This is really important when you're doing funding, is to just establish an introductory call and ask questions about the organization, about the funder, the donor. Ask them their passion, their purpose, ask where their strategic priorities are. This shows your interest and also shows that you're engaging in active storytelling through active listening. And then the fourth one is communicate your value propositions. So let's say you're in this introductory call and you need to communicate to them why you should be funded during their funding cycle, which is coming up. What makes you different than the 400 people who are about to apply for the same level of funding? So you communicate your value proposition. What diversifies your service from another? Maybe you are vertically integrated in that you do supportive services as well as career training. Maybe you service a specific population that is marginalized and doesn't have as much access to resources. Maybe you yourself have lived experience. The value proposition can be small or it can be big. Regardless, communicate what makes you different to the individuals that you are telling your story to. And then create your developmental collateral. Creating your development collateral really starts off with the theory of change in your logic model. So the theory of change, like I mentioned before, it talks about why you think or why you have understood and measured the way that you are implementing change in the community. So you identify the problem and then you talk about your solutions. What are the activities you're going to do to accomplish the solution? And what has been your current success model? Your theory of change is a one-page document. It should be really quick to give off your story, to give off your value proposition. And the same for your logic model. Your logic model does the exact same, but it's more in a sequential pathway. The logic model talks about the problem. Who is it? What's the population? Your inputs, so activities, maybe your investors. They could also be personnel. So who's on your board? Where's your network? Do you have letters of support that say, hey, this organization rocks and we're not related to what they do, but we support what they do? Do you have that? And then it moves into your short-term, long-term, and your intended outcomes. So your logic model is a progressive way, and it allows you to put what's in your mind on paper for funders and community members to get a better understanding of the pathway forward. And then I put this cute graphic down here about I, me, we, just to remind us that storytelling, story weaving, it starts with you as a storyteller. It starts off with the individual, the organization. It starts about how you make a meaning of yourself to others and how you make meaning of others to yourself. And then it goes into we. How do you weave yourself, your organization's narrative and mission into a collective narrative to make sense so it doesn't just serve you, it doesn't just serve you and your friend, but it serves the broader collective for a sustainable future and lasting transformation. Through this model, you will have more projected success. You will have an increase in community, as well as it has been seen and proven that through this model, you are engaging in retention because individuals who are heard stick around a little longer, and individuals who see their part in the impact want to be a team player, regardless of how big or how small their role is. If they are included in the narrative and if they're included in the initiatives forward, they are going to be bought in holistically and fully into the impact that is desired to be delivered. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. I do have this quick little slide here. If you'd like to follow me on LinkedIn, that is a scan code to my LinkedIn. And then I thought maybe I didn't see any Q&A in the box, but if there was questions, I left us about 15 or 14 minutes to talk, answer some questions, or just to get off the call early and receive our 15 minutes back of this beautiful day, wherever we are located. So I guess if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box or also in the chat. The chat seems to be working. It does look like that this recorded session will be sent out to everyone, so feel free to share it as well, engage with it. And then, yeah, mark your calendars for the next webinar, right, Jen?
Thanks so much, Ebony. Thank you for sharing your story and for helping all of us to better share ours. So we do have a few minutes left. If anyone has questions for Ebony, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. Or if not, we'll just wrap it up. Anybody? All right. Well, thank you. You will receive an email with a link to the recording and Ebony's contact information if you want to follow up and get more information or support for your organization. But thank you all. Thanks for joining us. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Yes, thank you. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Cindy.
Goodbye.